Oh, yes, welcome. Now, last Saturday in Nottingham, Carl Froch won his third version of the world super-middleweight title when he stopped previously unbeaten Lucien Boutte. It was a fantastic performance. Carl is a quality boxer. This week, the debate has raised about where he stands compared to the other great British super-middles. Now, I decided to go to the top, and earlier I spoke to Joe Calzaghe. He went unbeaten in 46 fights, made 21 defences of his world super-middleweight title, and he's generally regarded as one of the best fighters of his or any other generation. Now, I started by asking Joe if he had watched Carl's win, and if he had, what were his first impressions?
Yeah, well, obviously, I've not really watched Boutte. Obviously, you know, he owns a version of the world title, so I saw it as a 50-50 fight, but I think it was pretty evident from the start of the fight that, you know, that I didn't sort of, he looked quite sort of, rabbit in the headlights sort of thing, you know. Boutte, he looked, you know, a bit hesitant. He looked quite slow. And, you know, fair play to Carl, you know, he took advantage of the situation. He basically pressured him, you know, he was determined, you know, punching hard. And I was impressed. He had an impressive performance, you know, to beat a version of the world titleist. You know, it was impressive in the manner that he did it, you know. He won in emphatic style.
And since then, there have been lots of debates about where Carl sits with regards to some of our great fighters. Ben, obviously, Eubank, Collins, and then generally regarded the top of the pile. You and Carl has suggested that perhaps that performance means that he's eclipsed everyone else's performances.
Yeah, well, on a personal thing, you know, I think, listen, it was a good performance, but I think he's getting probably carried away by saying he's above everybody else in the pile. You have to remember that he got beaten emphatically a few months earlier against Andre Ward, so, you know, Carl's not even the best in the division, but, you know, to say he's eclipsed by just myself, but Ben Eubank, I think is a bit sort of premature. I mean, in saying that sort of thing, you know.
What was your take on, you know, on the situation with Ben and Eubank and Collins? Obviously, you came about just at the end. I know you beat Eubank, but it was at the start of your career, the end of his career, and the Collins fight never happened. I mean, you know, you never ever suggested that you were streets or heads above all of them, did you?
Well, I don't suggest that. The thing is, I think with Carl, he likes to, you know, say he's a legend and he's great and he's everything else. He loves to talk himself up a lot. You know, I like to do my talking in the ring, and obviously, you know, undefeated and being a world champion for over a decade, and beating some top-line fighters. I think you you can't really call yourself a great fighter until you sort of unify the title and be the best in the division. And I like to think I was the best two divisions, although I only was light heavyweight champion, ring champion for a brief spell before I retired. But Hopkins was a top-line fighter and was number one in the division, one of the best pound for pound in the world when I beat him. So I don't really go around calling myself a legend. I let people make their own assumptions, and I don't really compare myself to fighters of the past like Ben, Eubank, and Collins. They're great fighters, and to me, I don't really want to say I'm a better fighter. I let the public and let people at the end of your career decide who's the best and who's the best fighter in the division, and it's up to everybody's own perception, and you know, everybody can have their own opinion, you know. But you know, like I said, you know, on the positive, it was a good performance.
Sure.
You know, but like I said, you know, I think he has to unify the title and basically be the best in the division before he starts making comments of being the greatest super-middleweight this country's produced. You know.
It does seem to make sense. Let me ask you this, Joe. Just when you first, after you beat Roy Jones, late 2008 and into 2009, when Carl had just won the world title, was there a point there in that first 6 months to 9 months of your retirement where you considered coming back? Was there a point at that time? Not now. I mean, in that 8 or 9 month period.
Well, there's always in the back of your mind, but I have to be honest. I know Carl talks a good one, but at the end of the day, you know, he just held a version of the world title, and to be honest, he keeps banging on about me never fighting him and never getting the opportunity, and he challenged me. But the thing is, at that stage, Mikkel Kessler was 39-0 and held the WBC and WBA title. So no offense to Carl, but obviously Mikkel Kessler was a much bigger fighter. After Mikkel Kessler, Hopkins was the big fish out. The Ring Magazine champion, just beat the number one in the world at that stage. So I just wanted to fight the best. Obviously, Carl has gone on since I retired, and he's done great. And you know, he's took part in the Super Sixes that obviously wasn't around in my days. I wish they were, because it would have been fantastic for my super middleweight division to get the Super Sixes. It would have made big names of so-called champions and former champions, obviously, that took part in the Super 6. So yeah, that's that really. But no, obviously I look back and it was you know, this is like 3 years ago now, you know, and he's still doing well. But I think that obviously, you know, he has to really fight the likes of Andrew Ward, who was actually the number one in the division, you know, at super-middleweight tournament, when the big fighters are like heavyweight. I think to take that next step up in his career, it was a good performance. But I think, you know, let's not take things out of context. He beat a fighter that's never really been tested, never stepped outside of Canada. And although it was a very good performance, you know, I think you have to put things in perspective, you know.
Yeah, listen, so do I. Listen, Joe, before I let you go, and thanks for your time, how's the acting going?
Yeah, it's okay, mate. It's all right.
It's hard work, isn't it?
No, not as successful as the boxing, mate. But you know, I've got 2 film roles. I'm still waiting for the date for them, you know. But listen, at the end of the day, you know, I just do it for something different I can enjoy and a bit of fun at. You know, I'm not really chucking all my eggs in one basket. I'm not waiting for a Hollywood call up yet, mate. So it's all good.
Joe, let me just remind you of this, mate. It was 15 years from when you first boxed to when you won a world title. So acting's no different than the boxing, mate. You got 14 more years to get there, okay?
That's good, mate. I'll be a grandfather by the time I'm doing it, mate, but that's all good.
It doesn't matter. With a little bit of surgery, you'll still look young. Trust me, De Niro does it, everyone else does it.
Yeah, why not, mate? Get the Hollywood, see the plastic surgeon and sort me out, mate.
That was Joe Calzaghe talking to me a bit earlier. Now, Carl Froch's win against Lucien Boutte delivered Sky its biggest ever boxing audience. That's for a non-pay-per-view. It also raised Froch's profile, and it has inevitably led to questions of where exactly he stands alongside the great British super-middleweight. So what I decided to do was a little bit of research. So I opened up my Twitter, which is @BigDaddyBunts, and I had hundreds of replies. In fact, it could be up to about 1,000 by the time we go off air tonight. It was quite simple. I just asked who he should fight or stroke where he stood. Anyway, here's a sample. Ashley Theophane. There's @Ashley Theophane, the former British light welterweight champion. He said, in my opinion, Carl Froch is the best British super middle of all time. And James Austin, 71, agreed with him. And most people, it seemed to me, wanted to see Carl against Steve Collins. Certainly Luke, my 23586844, boxing writer, Berry Collin, Vicky Makeup, Tone Stotts, Lee Murtagh, Michael Going, all fancied him against Steve Collins. Link Box, Saeed Afzat, Tommy Bateson, Billy Harvey, K. Chris 82, Craig Owen 11, Barry John, Chris Wads, and Stu Casely. They all went for Nigel Benn. Bobby Rimmer, the trainer from Manchester, and Barkari Jamo, who runs a community radio show up there in Manchester, and a very good one too. He said, the only person I see beating Froch would be Ben. Scott 8458 said Calzaghe, Ben Eubank, Watson, Reed in their prime will all beat him, and Ben stops him. Sugar Ray 88, Gary Doherty, and Marosco 93 said Calzaghe against Froch would be a stunner. Ham 17 said he's not quite above Calzaghe, he needs to avenge his Kessler loss. Budgie 1980 EFC and Studney Jones said Froch will always be in Calzaghe's shadow. And CJSN 1982 said Calzaghe's chin would have been too much. Now, this mob said that Calzaghe would box his ears off. It's a big one. Tyrone Virone, Dizzy KG, Mina 1, Jay Windsor, JKD Rob, Jamie Bills 1, Michael Hills 47, Carl Scott 99, Martin 11, Lewis 11, Jay Haribo, Ben the Spark, Chris M. Websey, Monster 1980, Alex Pemberton all thought that Calzaghe would box his ears off. Dave Griff, 1984, and McNamara, 89. Froch would have destroyed Joe Calzaghe, those two say. All Walks, Connors Official, and Ivan Drago, 1999, said Eubank, that would be the fascinating fight. Woodis said Calzaghe, just to show people how close it would be. Woodis, that's a good shout, if you don't mind me saying so. And It's Always Dan, said Froch and DeGale, 2014, Bunsey, how about that? And Chris Mason TV's gone old school on me. Tony Simpson, who of course was a middleweight, but if he was boxing now, Mr. Mason, the darts commentator, former player, yes, he would be fighting at super middle. And Joey Lippett says Michael Watson, who of course was a middle, his last fight was at super middle, September 21st, 1991, Spurs against Chris Eubank for the vacant WBO super middleweight title. Of course, if Watson was fighting now, he'd also be a super middle. I'm convinced of it. Jimmy Mallon says Ben at his peak, and he says I picked Carl, and I'm a massive Ben fan. And Sean Brown, who does a lot of work for Dave Caldwell, he says, what about Great Britain's first world super middleweight champion, Murray Sutherland, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was born in Scotland? And Baz Ladd says Froch beats Ben and Woodall. Froch loses to Eubank and Calzaghe, and he draws with Collins. Baz, you've given that plenty of thought. And Brian King 80 says Calzaghe and Eubank beat him, and Carl's chin would not be able to deal with Ben. So what's overwhelming here, looking at that kind of survey of 50 or 60 names I've read out there, is that at least he belongs in that company. And that's something I agree with, is that that's where he belongs. I can see Calzaghe's frustration there, because Joe was never one to come out of the ring and say, I'd knock out Ben, I'd knock out Eubank, I'd knock out Watson. It was a bit lively at the start of his career. By the time he got to his late 20s, he'd mellowed out. And perhaps that's about the only foot that Carl Froch put wrong last weekend and all week, was suggesting that he was better than all of those guys. Just being in their company is enough. Those are not just great British fighters, not just great super middleweights. They were great fighters, period. And to be connected to them, in my opinion, is more than enough. And that seems to be what you all think. Keep the tweets coming at Big Daddy Bunce.